My name is Bob Cochums. I'm the District Attorney of Mercer County. My office will be using the information and the evidence that you collect to prove a sexual assault type case beyond a reasonable doubt. We want to be able to do this, or we want to have you go through this training with us so that you understand the whys of why this is important to everyone that is involved and for the system itself. There are many crimes that are considered sexual assaults. It covers everything from rape and involuntary deviant sexual intercourse to touchings and even to corruption of the morals of a minor. In addition to those crimes, there are crimes that are related to sexual assault. There's harassment, there's sexting that we now have to deal with, and there are things like burglary when someone breaks into your house to commit the sexual assault. So you, as the investigators of these particular crimes, have the duty and the obligation to understand what you need to collect so that my office can then make an evaluation. Because what we are evaluating is whether we can prove the elements of the particular crime beyond a reasonable doubt. Investigating is like being a vacuum cleaner, or an investigator is running a vacuum cleaner. Your job is to pick up and protect as much evidence as you possibly can, whether or not it is relevant to what is going on in the particular case. You have to suspend your belief in your credibility to do this. The object, therefore, is to gather as much information as possible as quickly as possible. Because sexual assaults involve some of the largest sentences that ever occur in the court system, it's important that we have sufficient evidence, because people who are charged with sexual assaults tend to go and they're going to go to trial. They're going to want to defend their case because they know they are looking at severe punishments, and are also looking at much social stigmatization. Remember, these people are going to be registered in many cases as sex offenders. Their families are going to suddenly learn that they have an interest in young children that they shouldn't have, that they may have even assaulted a family member. So all of this comes into their play on, I have to go to trial, I have to prove my innocence because of the punishment and the social stigma that they're going to entertain. So unlike many cases where, oh, we can do something and that's enough, there's never enough in sexual assault cases. The evidence must be collected in its entirety, and it must be collected in a large measure to have it ready, available for whatever would occur. Now, what happens with this, and we also use this evidence to deal with people who are wrongly charged eventually. That's a very small percentage of the people who are charged with a crime of sexual assault. Almost invariably, we're going to know, or we're going to be able to prove this case. But there are percentages, and that is a small percentage, and what we can't do is make that determination too early. One of the things that you're going to encounter in many sexual assaults is that victims deal with at-risk behavior. In other words, the victim's at a bar, the victim's drinking, the victim says yes to certain sexual acts but no to certain other sexual acts. All of those things are at-risk behavior that prejudice or make the investigator feel something towards the victim less than doing a full and complete and thorough investigation. So the first thing the investigator's got to do is suspend their belief. When you encounter a victim of an alleged sexual assault, you have to accept what the victim says. You have to be willing to say, go on, tell me more. And you have to do this in an open-ended questioning manner, in a manner that says, I'm most interested in hearing your story, not telling you what your story should be. In other words, you want to make sure that the person starts at the beginning. How did you meet him? Where did you go? How long have you been doing things? Open-ended questions that do not suggest answers, because what you're collecting is the evidence to do that, to eventually narrow it down. The second thing you do is you don't confront inconsistencies. You may attempt to reconcile them after you've got a much fuller statement near the end of your initial statement, but the initial statement is not to confront inconsistencies. It's to hear and learn what the victim says. What this does from the victim's point of view is it lets them feel heard. And that's extremely important, because if you've been raped, if you've had your control taken away from you, you do not have the ability, you're going to feel constrained and you're going to feel threatened by everyone. We don't want that to occur. We want the victim to feel that they can talk to us. The other thing is, if you feel empowered, we're attempting to empower or give the victim some sense of their powerfulness by being able to tell their whole story, not having it cut off with just the facts, ma'am. I don't need to know about that, or I don't need to know this. What we're trying to do is get the whole story to empower the victim and to make them feel protected, to make them feel they are heard in what's going on. Now, what do we do with that? Once you have that information, you can fine-tune it, you can go closer, you can do whatever, but frankly, the next thing we want to do, and the most important thing we want to do, is we want to go find out who the perpetrator is. If the perpetrator is named, our goal is to get to the perpetrator as quickly as possible and to get a statement, any statement, the longer the better, from the perpetrator. We don't care whether it is consistent, inconsistent, or anything else with the victim's statement. And again, we want it to be open-ended. We're investigating this. Tell us your side, or tell us what happened tonight. We want a general statement, because no matter what it is, if they change it later, we can call it a lie. So what we're seeking is to get them to talk to us, to give us something to hang our hat on. Now, later on, as the investigation proceeds, both the victim and the perpetrator's statements and other things will be analyzed a lot more closely. We'll be looking at, do they make out this element of the crime or that element of the crime? But again, this is where you're going to pick up, well, I went into her house without permission, and so she was angry at me. We used to date, but we don't date anymore. And so I showed up because I wanted to talk to her, one of the most famous euphemisms in this area. So what we're trying to get you to do is gather data non-judgmentally. And the more the victim feels this, the more the victim is likely to testify into the future. That brings us lastly to the SART team. We have a sexual assault response team. The nurses are trained to do this. The first responders should recognize that they may have done many more investigations or questionings of victims than they have in the past, so let them do it. Let them do their job. Aware will be supporting the victim. But now we come to what this all means to the victim is a word called process. Process is simply, I'm not ready to deal with this now, or I'm only willing to tell you this much now, but I'll tell you more later, and maybe a little bit more later on. That's the most difficult thing for law enforcement to have to deal with in both domestic violence and sexual assault cases, is that the victim is not ready to talk all about it at once. And so you have to work through it over time. Sometimes that could take as long as a year. Sometimes it could take 5 and 10 years with a child. So we are asking you then to please be open-minded and gather your information, and then we'll decide how important that information is. Thank you.